Welcome back to the deep dive. So what we do here is we take a really dense stack of sources and research, and we try to distill it all down so you get the key insights without all the overload.
And today, we're diving into the world of Emily Dickinson, a world that was, fiercely private, but just ferociously brilliant.
That's right. But we should be clear, this isn't just another summary of her life or her greatest hits.
No, not at all. We're looking at a very specific, um, highly structured literary analysis of her entire philosophical journey.
Her life, her language, and even what happens after.
Exactly. What the source material speculates her consciousness might have done after she died.
I love this framing because the source material we're working from, it treats her whole story like a triptych, one of those three-paneled paintings.
Yeah, which forces you to see it all as one continuous argument. Her life, her work, and her ideas about the afterlife, they're not separate things. They're all connected.
So what are these three panels, these three movements, and I guess what's the glue that holds them all together?
Okay, so the three are the circumference years, which is basically the biographical setup. Then the dwelling in possibility, which gets into the nitty-gritty of her poetic techniques.
The nuts and bolts of her language.
Exactly. And finally, the white election, which is a really speculative part about her postmortal consciousness. And the glue, the central point for all three, is a concept she used herself.
The circumference.
The circumference. Okay, let's unpack that because it sounds like a limit, right? A boundary.
It is, but the whole point of the analysis is that she used those limits to find something infinite.
So she drew a line just so she could push against it.
Precisely. She was always defining the edge of the knowable, the conventional world, and then just pressing against that boundary until the membrane between what's real and what's imagined got, well, almost translucent.
So her famous privacy, her refusal to conform, that wasn't random. It was a strategy.
It was the necessary framework for her poetry. She had to define her limits to find her infinitude. And that idea of purposeful limitation, that's really the key to everything we're about to get into. Okay, so if the circumference is the boundary, we have to start with the most obvious one she chose. The homestead in Amherst.
Her house.
And the source is very clear that the house itself wasn't just a metaphor. It was a tool, a laboratory.
Absolutely. It wasn't a prison. It was a circumstance she chose so she could do this really concentrated interior work. There's this quote where she says, "A house's argument in brick that here and not there matters."
Wow. So by saying no to the outside world, she could say yes to the inside one.
And put all her energy there.
That sounds incredibly intense, and the source argues a lot of that intensity came from resisting the forces inside the house, especially her father, Edward Dickinson.
Oh, absolutely. He was described as austere, formidable. His heart was pure and terrible.
Pure and terrible, what a phrase.
Isn't it? And she essentially learned discipline by resisting his discipline. He was the world of rules, of law and order. The source says he read the world in columns ruled and neat, while she was looking for the larger news that falls outside the pane.
She just took his rigor and aimed it at poetry instead of politics.
Turned it inward. Exactly.
You can feel that clash of wills. And for someone who resisted so much, it makes sense she would need a protector. Let's talk about her sister, Lavinia, or Vinnie.
Vinnie is so important. She's the sister who never married, stayed right there at the homestead, and became the guardian of the work.
And this is something you really have to remember. Vinnie is the reason we have the poems. Full stop.
100%.
Yeah.
After Emily died, Vinnie found the fascicles, these 40 little hand-sewn booklets with almost 800 poems, just stuffed in a drawer.
If she had just thrown them out.
We might have lost Dickinson entirely. The source has this beautiful phrase for Vinnie's role, calling her the silence that protected song.
She created the circumference for the poems themselves. Speaking of crucial relationships, maybe the most central person in Emily's life, the one who defined her emotional circumference, was Susan Huntington Gilbert Dickinson.
Susan, yes. Her neighbor, her friend, her soulmate, really. She got nearly 300 letters and more poems than anyone else.
And then Susan married Emily's brother, Austin, and moved in right next door.
To a house called the Evergreens.
Yeah.
Which allowed this incredible intensity to be maintained for decades.
What's so fascinating is how their relationship became its own kind of circumference. The analysis calls it one of the closest distances, one of the most unbridgeable gaps.
They were literally separated by a hedge, but after the marriage, they were emotionally worlds apart.
And that tension fueled some of her most powerful writing.
You can feel it. Think of that line he wrote to Susan before the marriage. I would drown you in my feeling if feeling were a sea. The depth of that bond that survived everything it anchored her.
Which proves her withdrawal wasn't a retreat from feeling.
No, it was a retreat for it, to protect it.
And that led to her famous withdrawal into her calling, her vocation. It really started at Mount Holyoke, right, when she refused to profess her faith.
Yes, she stayed stubbornly in the third category. It was this early declaration of her own spiritual independence.
And a declaration like that needs a uniform, the white dress.
Right. And the source makes a great point here. It wasn't a bridal gown. It wasn't for mourning. It was the uniform of yes.
A uniform of yes.
The habit of a kind of secular nun devoted to what she called one continuous attention. She was literally building her whole life to support her poetry.
And her study wasn't just indoors. Her garden was like her church, her practical theology. How did flowers teach her about resilience?
She watched them so closely, their whole life cycle. And the source argues that by seeing that speed, the blooming and the decay, she concluded that fragility and resilience are the same thing.
Because the flower's fragility is what makes its brief life so powerful.
And her job was just to pay attention to it. Disciplined attention.
Which brings us to the final devastating collapse of her personal circumference, losing her nephew, Gilbert or Gib.
He was only 8. Typhoid fever in 1883.
And this wasn't just a sad event, it was seismic for her.
It was. Gib was the one young relative she was truly close to, and his death just broke her health. She called him with this heartbreaking precision, the only argument I had against the dark.
That one unjust limit was the thing that finally broke the architecture of her life.
It was.
So that transition from her finite life to her infinite language. That's our shift to the second panel. The source says, if the homestead was the house of her life, her poems were the house of her spirit.
I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose. That's her line.
So what is this possibility?
It's that space before a choice collapses all the potential meanings into just one. Prose, for her, closes the door. Poetry holds it open.
So her circumference wasn't just physical, it was linguistic.
Yes. She defined the limit of language prose and just pushed against it constantly to find what was possible.
Okay, let's talk about the tools she used to build this house. The most famous one has to be the dash. We see them everywhere. What is the dash really doing?
It's so much more than a pause. The source calls it a threshold, or a bridge between two truths. It's an active refusal of the closure of the period.
Because a period just ends the thought. The dash says it keeps going somewhere else.
Exactly. There's this amazing quote about it in the source.
Can you read it? It's a bit complex.
Sure. It says, the dash says something else entirely. It says the trail is gone, but go into somewhere you may find if you will risk the jump.
Risk the jump. So the dash is like a command to the reader. You have to do the work to cross the gap she left.
You do. It's the visual sign that she will not settle for one safe meaning inside the sentence.
And that idea of not being direct, that also connects to slant rhyme, right? Her use of near rhymes or off rhymes, why not just use perfect rhymes?
Oh, it was completely intentional. The analysis here defines slant as a form of tact.
Tact.
Yes. It's the strategy that lets you see something that's too bright to look at directly, like the sun. Perfect rhyme feels too neat, too finished. Slant lets you get close to the truth without destroying its mystery.
She wouldn't break the circumference around a sacred idea by being too direct.
Exactly. She'd just bend it.
And she'd use a familiar structure to do it. The common meter, that 8-6-8-6 hymn rhythm, she would have heard her whole life. But she never just uses it straight.
She subverts it. She gives you a hymn that limps. By adding a syllable here or taking one away there, she makes you stumble as you read.
So you expect the comfort of the rhythm, and then suddenly you're thrown off.
And you become intensely aware of the cracks in the form. It forces you to pay attention to the wild ideas she's smuggling inside this very traditional container.
It's like she used the circumference of the hymn to sneak in these radical ideas. Let's look at some of those ideas. First, her take on love and desire.
The source points to the master letters, those
Yeah.
passionate letters that were never sent, and just the raw eroticism in so many poems. The desire is real, even if it's all happening inside the circumference of her own mind.
Wild nights, were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury.
Yeah. That is not polite Victorian poetry.
Not at all. Then there's her theodicy. We should probably define that for listeners.
Theodicy is just the branch of theology that asks the big question. If God is good and all-powerful, why is there so much suffering in the world?
And Dickinson's faith wasn't comfortable. It was more like a fight.
A constant, almost hostile negotiation.
Yeah. And she had the nerve to just flip the whole idea of prayer on its head. What's the line?
It's just, Audacious. She basically inverts original sin. She writes, "Of God we ask one favor, that we may be forgiven for what he did to us."
Wow. That's revolutionary. She's holding God accountable for our suffering.
She's not just questioning the circumference of faith, she's demanding that it break.
And that leads right into her incredible ideas about consciousness and the mind. The source focuses on the sheer scale she claimed for our inner world.
Oh yeah, the brain is wider than the sky. And even more amazing, the brain is just the weight of God.
So she was saying the self is sovereign. The world inside you contains the world outside you. The homestead was small, but the mind she built inside it was boundless.
And that idea of the immense sovereign mind,
Yeah.
it's the perfect bridge to our final, most speculative panel.
Okay, so we're entering the third panel, the white election. This is where the analysis gets really interesting. If the mind is wider than the sky, what happens when the body, the final circumference, is gone?
The source assumes that consciousness is the only freight that travels past the grave.
So the I, the personality, is shed, but the core thinking self goes on. How does it survive?
It doesn't dissolve, it dilates. She becomes a pronoun growing wide. The consciousness, freed from the body, starts to exceed physical laws. She suggests consciousness, I think, exceeds what physics dares to learn.
That's amazing. She was thinking about quantum physics before it was even a thing.
She really was. And the source connects this to the idea of a photon, how it can be both a wave and a particle.
How does that apply to her?
It connects to observation. The idea is that her consciousness is elastic. Observed, I am a single point, but unobserved, I spread like dawn.
So the afterlife is collapsing the pretense that we were ever particle.
In other words, the real self is a wave of potential. And it's only our attention, our observation, that collapses it back into a fixed point, into Emily Dickinson, the historical figure.
Which brings it right back to us, the reader. So the dead aren't frozen in time.
No. The source calls this the technology of haunting. The dead don't return as ghosts in sheets. They return in the words we read.
So the poem itself becomes a seance held in broad daylight.
The moment you open the book and give it your full attention, her consciousness returns. It's, as she says, between your ears.
That gives the reader so much power, and it brings us to this idea of the bargain of the dead. If they live through our reading, then they aren't stuck in their time.
No, they live because we let them change, let them be reinterpreted. But, and this is crucial, she doesn't come back to offer comfort. She describes herself as a furnace dressed in frost.
A furnace dressed in frost. That's a terrifying and brilliant image. So intense heat, but at a distance?
Yes, because comfort is the enemy of attention. She comes back to find the place where the reader had not been moved. She is there to challenge your numbness.
The challenge is the point.
Exactly.
So this whole structure, her life, her language, her afterlife, it all comes down to the power of attention. She sees the living as lamps. What makes one lamp brighter than another?
The source is very clear. It's the depth of their attention, and what allows for that depth, the willingness to break.
So people who protect themselves, who keep their conventional circumferences intact, they give off a dimmer light.
But those who risk being shattered by feeling, by a new idea, who risk the jump across the dash, they're the ones who illuminate everything. For Dickinson, paying attention, really paying attention, is the highest form of being alive, whether you are alive or dead.
Okay, let's just zoom out for a second. We've gone from the finite homestead, her circumference, to the architecture of her verse, the dwelling in possibility, and then all the way to this infinite continuation of her thought in the white election.
And the unifying thread is that relentless, rigorous attention. It's the engine of consciousness.
She withdrew not to hide from the world, but to see it more clearly.
Exactly. She refused the lie of completion, in life and in art. And what you learn from this analysis is that the real poem isn't the ink on the page. It's in the space of the encounter.
The source concludes it's in the space between your seeing and what you look upon.
And that space is the dwelling she built for us. Her real legacy is that the dwelling is still open. And that's the final thought we want to leave you with. The source material closes on this promise that connects her directly to you right now.
What does it say?
The house stands open. The visitor is always arriving. The poem is always beginning.
The work is never finished. It's just passed to the next reader.
Meaning that your process of engaging with a deep idea like this, well, that's the conversation. It's still happening.